Good evening and welcome everyone to the Retro Recall podcast. We are back again with another episode, and tonight I'm joined with my buddies Steve and Ram. We got a pretty fun topic. I hope you fellas remembered your Blockbuster card, that little laminated one. I know sometimes it's easy to misplace it, but if you got it, we're still good. There's still one open on the West Coast out here, so as long as we remember to rewind those tapes, we're good to go. So tonight, if you guys join me on a journey back to the 90s, mainly back in time when we used to walk into those glorious retro stores and stare at all the box art for video games and for movies. I know I can picture some right now, just ones that stood out to me as a kid. So let's just go around, everyone talk, and just give me a couple memories of walking into a Blockbuster or a Hollywood or any other ones. Steve, do you have any memories you'd like to share?
Yeah, so local to us, it was mostly Blockbuster, and we had Movie Gallery, and then we had like one or two mom and pop ones. There was always seemed to be those little mom and pop stores that had a dollar rental. They never had the video games, or if they did, they were always terrible video games. But I remember getting a lot of different ones from those. Blockbuster, always going there, and them being out of the game I wanted to rent because they didn't prioritize the games on the shelf as opposed to the gigantic selection of movies and guarantees around having it in stock. But a lot of great experiences, spent a lot of time in rental stores. We all did. You mentioned the laminated card. I always remember how flimsy that thing was. I don't think kids realize today you didn't use a credit card to rent it. Now you had to get your little barcode scanner out and get that bad boy laminated and scanned before you could be official in the club there. So yeah, lots of good memories. We got a lot of good content coming. I got a lot of thoughts on this topic. So thanks for kicking it over to me, Bill. Maybe Ram, you want to go ahead and chime in?
Yeah, so pretty much all the same for you guys. Blockbuster for sure, and then we had the mom and pop shops as well. But the most I remember is you would go and rent a game. You're like, oh, the cover art looks amazing, and then you get it home and you're like, this game's a piece of crap. And probably the worst one is Superman 64. Like, just ruined a weekend because you couldn't go take it back because there's nothing else. I rented that flaming bag of crap and taking that piece of crap home and just being severely disappointed, and weekend was ruined. That's probably the worst experiences that I've had. It's just picking up something you expected and just completely, you're like, I paid $7 for this.
Well, it was even worse with those bad rentals, which I had the same experience. Half the time I rented a game, it was terrible. And they came in like a 2-day, a 3-day, a 4-day rental, depending on what you paid for it. If you had 4 days, you were going to use it because you didn't want to waste your 4-day rental. And then what was even worse is if you forgot, or maybe your parents couldn't take you back to the store to go return that thing, you got slapped with the late fee, and it was a terrible game. So you like double paid on that bad boy. That money was few and far between for a lot of us in our youth. So I totally relate to that, Rom.
Yeah, I guess I do have definite memories of games that were not what was advertised on the back of the art. But I guess maybe I was just young enough that a lot of them I just pushed through and played those games and took them back and then just went, yep, I guess I won't get that one next time. So that's what I have for memory for sure. But how early back do you guys remember renting? I remember NES games and seeing the store owner even had all original cardboard boxes, and then he would have those plastic clamshells, and then that would, determine if the game was available to rent or not. All the boxes were displayed on the shelf nicely so you could see that beautiful art. And then of course you see, oh, Contra, that looks great. Of course it was not there. All the good games were checked out. So it wasn't until probably the N64 days when you walked in and there would be like 20 copies of GoldenEye all on the top shelf. So that was a bit interesting. I thought is, hey, they kind of caught on. We're going to only buy the most popular games, a bunch of copies. And then you'd only see one copy of Superman or Glover or whatever. But that was one thing I remember from early, like really young, is seeing all the box art for Nintendo games and then sometimes being disappointed that they didn't have the one I wanted, like Mario 3 There was definitely some games that I discovered renting and just kept renting them, kept renting them. I'd be curious to know, is there any games that you guys rented multiple times?
For me, that was definitely Banjo Kazooie. I own Banjo Tooie. I got it on my birthday, and I always remember that. I still got the original box for that thing. But Banjo Kazooie is what got me into that, and that was totally the rental store. And when that thing was sold out, and I really wanted to rent it and try to beat it, because I could never beat it in 2 days or 3 days, whatever you had. I mean, it's a big game, and I'd be so disappointed when it was gone. There was one copy.
Yeah.
I was not fortunate enough to have 20 copies of GoldenEye. There'd be two if you were lucky. I remember even the NES stuff too. You were talking about earliest memories. My dad, when he would go to work, there was some kind of rental store that still had NES games when I first got the NES. My local store, like Movie Gallery, one of those type, it did not have NES games. It just had the current gen. It might have been Sega Genesis, Super Nintendo at the time. But that one had it, and he would bring those home and rent those occasionally. It was like a budget place too. Like, you pay $1 or $2. I don't remember what I played. It's been a long time, but I remember him bringing those home and, having fun trying out new Nintendo games. And what I didn't realize as a kid is that my parents would sit there and play it at night. So for them to say they don't play video games, yeah, they did.
Busted.
Totally busted.
That's great. There was lots of times for some reason, only NES and N64 stand out in my mind of cartridge games. I'm sure I rented some Super Nintendo games. I never owned a Genesis when I was a kid, but then I do have a lot of movie rental place memories of PS2. There's even some games that come to mind that I specifically remember seeing that seemed unique. And if it weren't for the box art, I probably wouldn't have ever rented them. One, this is going to come to a surprise to guys in the retro community. I rented the game Mr. Mosquito. Anyone remember that one? That game's kind of spendy these days. I specifically remember renting that one because it was such an odd premise and such a weird idea for a game. And it's just sitting there on the rental shelf. And I was like, what is this? So that's a specific one that just for some reason sticks in my mind. Next thing I was going to mention to you guys, Steve, you had mentioned some names. Rom, do you have any other names of other places you can think of from back in the day besides Blockbuster?
Mainly Blockbuster for me. I mean, there's a couple mom and pop places. Blockbuster, because there's like 4 in my town. One mom and pop place. What I remember the most about that is you have your drama, your comedies. Well, the horror section was like a haunted house. Like you walked in, it's probably, I don't know, probably like 20 feet by 10 foot, but you walk in and you're like walking up to the Evil Dead house and the floorboards are creaking and there's a sarcophagus in the back with the mummy in it and like Frankenstein all in the back. Like it was scary. Like you walk in and they had like a sound machine with creepy voices and stuff. As a kid, I was like kind of freaked out, but then I'm like, there's some really cool stuff in here. Every time I had to come in there, I had to go take a look and see what was new. That was pretty cool as a kid. Nobody does that anymore.
Yeah, I feel like we've lost some of that type of a vibe and brick and mortar type stores. And yeah, that's definitely a unique way to draw in some customers and have an attraction almost for those horror flicks.
We didn't really have any special attractions like that. That's pretty cool, Rom. I've never seen that in a rental store. I would have been all about that as a kid. I just always remember the adults only. There was like this curtain in like every store that had an adults only. I'm like, what's in the adults only? Like, is it rated R movies back there? Now I know as an adult, but it was one of those things that like you couldn't go in a rental store without most of them having that. Blockbuster didn't, but a lot of the other ones did.
Most video stores in Japan, it's like a floor that's curtained off. And I was like, wow, I hadn't seen that since a video store back when I was a kid. And then every store that we went in, like Akihabara, like you go to the 3rd floor and it's here's a little spot and the rest of it's got like a curtain. So they still use it, just not here in America.
Interesting. Interesting. I'd like to name off a few specific places. Just, I think it's unique. Lots of different name choices you could go with for a movie rental place. Just some memories I have of the place I grew up. Premiere Video, Take Two Video, Video Action, Morningside Video, Cashwise Video, which is like a grocery chain, Vid Cycle. There's just like a ton of different options. And I always found that interesting that they were kind of creative with the names of some of these places. I happen to frequent Take Two Video and Premiere Video the most. And I actually did some research before this episode. The town I grew up in, Premiere Video, had one location that closed as late as 2017. So they were just still just holding on by a thread. It would have been kind of interesting to see what it was like in its last days. I'm sure very bleak and just some Blu-rays and some new release DVDs or something. And I'm guessing if they had any games, I hate to say this, but it was probably like Just Dance or something. One of those IPs or properties that just never goes away. But yeah, it was just kind of interesting, all the different places. Changing topics a bit here, guys. Is there other specific memories? I know in Blockbuster, they had the candy aisle as you're checking out. Of course, I'm sure it was kid level, kid height, all kinds of different candy and gum and all these silly things. Of course, like I remember there being popcorn. I remember there being a few different places that had, just like at like a movie theater, like the big tub or whatever. And like I think you just brought it home and made it in the microwave or something. But it was kind of interesting. And then one other thing I wanted to mention was Blockbuster, I think, had, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but they had like a big gumball machine and you could stick a quarter in there. And if you're lucky enough, it would like have a little stamp on some of the gumballs and it was like good for a free rental. Does that ring a bell to anybody? Because I know like,
Free kids rental.
oh, okay. Of course, for the kids. Yeah. So I think that was kind of unique. And one more thing I was going to mention that this is definitely unique. I like to say that it was the only place that I went to as a kid, but there was one place in specific that the store owner was really cool. He was this older gentleman. He was always friendly. Ask how your day was going, is kind of a small town feel. And he had this vintage, and this was vintage back in the 90s, even. So I'm guessing it was like 70s or something. He would give kids, if you rented Nintendo games or something, he would give us tokens to put in this vintage slot machine. And it was like the old school, put a token in, pull the actual lever down, and then just, you sit and see the thing spinning. And, if it landed on 3 cherries or whatever symbols was like a jackpot or a win, or you'd win a free rental. I thought that was kind of cool. And I remember specifically having that store owner be all friendly to the kids and here, have some tokens for the machine before you leave. So that's just another thing that's kind of unique, I guess. Moving on, do you guys have any other specific memories? I know I had mentioned the card at the beginning of the episode, mentioning you had to have that card to scan to get your rental. Did you guys ever ride your bike over to the rental store and then not be able to rent it because you didn't have your card or your parent wasn't with?
So I have a few other memories just to kind of add into what you were just saying. You mentioned about the Blockbuster gumball machine. I totally remember the free rental. I can't remember if it was a children's rental like you mentioned, Rom, but I do remember seeing that. And I have a friend that actually found one of those recently. He bought it for like 100, $200. There's a little bit of a collector market out there for Blockbuster items, including some of the old signs. Back in the 90s, they not only had like signs on the front of the store, signs in the window. They also made those cool fiber optic signs like Nintendo had in the world of Nintendo setups and different stores. People hunt those down. They pay thousands of dollars for them. The Blockbuster one's pretty big. It's got the full logo. It lights up. It's got all these little blue twinkling stars. It's a pretty nice product out there. The other thing I also remember on top of the gumball machine reminded me of this. I hadn't thought about this in years. Is they used to have the quarter machines sitting right in the front of the rental store. And they'd have stickers, tattoos, and another one also had like those little plastic balls, like they put little junk toys in. And one of them would be like a free rental or something. You put a quarter in, you have a shot at getting a free rental, or you end up with a little army man or something. A lot of the stores had that kind of stuff, and then of course like the candy aisle. You can't miss the candy aisle. It's right in your face, and you're a kid on the way out. I forgot about the popcorn, but you're right. There were popcorn buckets. I mean, they threw everything at you, trying to get you to spend extra money on your way out the door, and everything was probably marked up at that aisle. But they knew once you were there with your parents, you were going to hook them in and get them to spend their hard-earned money.
Yeah, those are great points and good call on the quarter machines. That is something I feel like you don't see anywhere anymore. The tattoos and the little plastic globes with the junk toys. That is every now and then my kids will find some and it's just like what a waste, but yet back in my mind I'm like that was me when I was a kid too. So I don't blame them, I guess.
They're coming back.
Really?
They're coming back, man. Most of the game stops I go to now, they're called Getcha, and they're more expensive. They don't cost like 50 cents. They're like $4, and then you have to pay, and they give you a token, and you pop them in, and it's just all tons of anime characters and things like that. They're coming back, man. I like to see it, but it's just a lot more expensive than what we remember.
I used to go to Perkins and they would have the quarter machines in there. It's the first place I've seen it in years. And it's ironic because the Perkins is like right near where the old rental store used to be, like a couple doors down. So that Perkins has been there a long time. And they have the tattoos. They're like 50 cents. You got to put the double quarter in there. It's not just the one slot, it's the double. And then you twist that thing around, you hear the click, and boom, pops out a tattoo. In my mind, I'm like, wow, this is such a waste of money. But I'm like, that's a pretty cool looking tattoo. I would have loved that as a kid. They've gotten a lot cooler graphically. My luck, I'd end up with like a unicorn or something, putting a quarter in. Nothing more disappointing than getting the junk one.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Anybody remember those plastic watches that they put in there? Like, oh yeah, you can win a watch, and it was like the piece of junk little crystal display, LCD display.
You flaunted it until it broke 2 days later.
Oh yeah,
Good
definitely.
point, Rob.
Back to the rental thing. I just remembered checking my notes here. Steve, you had mentioned a couple times a discount type situation where like a dollar rental or something like that. I know my local places, I don't know if Blockbuster ever did something like this, but they always did like a 5 for 5 deal, or like then they changed it eventually to a 7 for 7. So you get to pick 5 movies. And a lot of times I think games are off limits for this deal, but it was 5 movies for 5 days for $5. And, same premise for the $7 deal. And I remember just thinking like, I always got hosed as a kid, right? My parents would be like, well, we'll pick four, and then you can maybe pick like a Ninja Turtles cartoon or something. And I just remember like thinking back, it's like, how come my parents get to pick way more than me? Usually I would still get a game out of the deal or something for the weekend. Do you guys remember that at all? That was kind of something unique that you would never see now. If rental stores were still around, it'd be $7 for 2 nights or something, like it would be expensive.
I don't remember a lot of deals on rentals, probably because I wasn't the one paying for a lot of that. I do remember the deals when you could buy stuff when they were closing out movies or closing out games and they went cheap. I don't remember what you would pay for them, but they always were like the same prices. There was they just wanted them gone kind of thing. You pay $5, $10, depending on what you were buying.
Yeah.
They had a lot of those kind of deals. I remember back in 2008, maybe, I went to a movie gallery. I had just moved down to Florida at the time, and that movie gallery was closing out their video game section, and they had half of the store basically like half empty, and then the other half of the store was the movies. So you could go in there and you could pick out whatever, and like they had Sega Dreamcast. I never owned a Sega Dreamcast, but I remember playing the heck out of Sonic Adventure in Toys R Us on the demo unit, blowing my mind. Like, what is this? This is awesome. Like this music, it had all that cool rock and roll sounding music going. And I saw that, and the guy's like, yeah, I'm trying to get rid of this. How about I box all the stuff up and you can have it for like $20? Sold.
Wow.
It was like I mean, there wasn't anything very expensive in there. I got 2 consoles out of it. I got some of the Sega Sports controllers. I must have got like 50 cables for Dreamcast. I don't know what they were doing with all this stuff. I got tons of memory cards and a couple games. They were nothing crazy, but it was something to start with Dreamcast. And they also had a massive pile of HD DVDs, which I don't know if anybody remembers the HD DVD versus Blu-ray battle. I did a lot of smack talking because I invested in HD DVD and spent a ton of money
Oh,
on that
me
thing.
too. All in. I still have some. I've got a bunch of the Mel Brooks HD DVDs. I loved it, man. I thought it was the coolest thing ever.
It was a great technology. I think Sony once again won that out because they went with the built-in Blu-ray player on the video game console. So I thought for a little bit that Toshiba was going to win out with the HD DVD, and I paid a lot of money. I did a lot of research before I bought that thing, but here I am in this 2008 movie gallery buying out all the HD DVDs, and a ton of them were new. Like they hadn't even put them out on the shelves; they were just closing them out, and they had like all the good titles. I bought them like $2 a piece. Somewhere sitting in a box, I haven't probably opened 90% of them. Is an awesome collection of HD DVDs. Maybe they'll become collector's items one day. But that's all the stuff I can really remember as far as discounted stuff.
So you guys will have to clue me in a little bit here. So So this was a Sony versus Toshiba thing. How long did the HD DVDs last? Was that just for a few years?
So there were two different competing technologies. There was HD DVD and Blu-ray when it first premiered. HD DVD had a lot of advantages to it. I can't remember if it was manufacturing cost, storage, all sorts of stuff that were advantageous to it. But Sony said, no, we're doing our own thing. And Sony, of course, being a big company. So then it became a battle of which movie studios were signing with HD DVD, which movie studios were already working with Sony or tied into Sony. So if you want this movie, you had to buy a Blu-ray. If you wanted this movie, you could get an HD DVD. And it was this whole market battle to see who's going to cave out first. We don't see that as much these days. It's kind of like the console wars, but move it into movies. At the end of the day, Microsoft, because they were a competitor of Sony, went in on the whole HD DVD battle, and they had an add-on for the console. I have one somewhere around here that was an HD DVD player, USB plug-in for your Xbox 360. They kind of took sides, but if Microsoft would have integrated that, because 360 was hugely successful, that may have shifted the tide a little more in Toshiba's favor, because they were winning for a bit, and then the PS3 really kind of rocked the boat and pushed Blu-ray in its favor, and then eventually Toshiba had to bow out once they had too much dominance. And the games, remember, the games were also Blu-ray discs on PS3, so they were using that extra space for the game storage. As we went to the current generation, all of them are Blu-rays now.
Yeah, so I would say that Sony definitely won the battle because I had obviously heard of HD DVDs, but when I think of that generation of consoles, PS3 having it built in natively definitely is what I remember. And if I'm not mistaken, was it exclusive to the PS3 before you could even buy Blu-ray players like separately?
So this is just like what happened with the PS2 era. The HD DVDs had independent players. I want to say I paid 250, $300 for this thing. So it was a pretty big investment. Then, if you wanted to buy a Blu ray player, Sony also produced Blu ray players. It was mainly the two companies against each other at that time. Then they decided to bake the PS3, and the PS3 had a built in Blu ray player. So, what happens? Oh, you can get a gaming system and you can get your Blu ray player all in one. So people bought it because they were intending to buy the $250, $200 player, spend a little more for the video game system, which puts more people in the household with video games. It also puts more users for Blu-ray, and it supports their case. It's the same thing that Sony did with the PS2 when DVDs were really taking off. They put the DVD player in the PS2, and then people started buying it because it was not that much difference in price than the typical DVD player at the time, which put people with PS2s in their house and gave them a huge advantage from the console standpoint. It's a strategy that Sony has replicated more than one time, and it has won more than once.
Interesting.
They could just throw money at it because they had so many different avenues to do it. Now Blu-ray players are few and far between. They're worth quite a bit now, but I still have an HD DVD player myself. How many HD DVDs do you have, Steve?
I probably have somewhere around 50 to 60.
Nice. Yeah, I got rid of a lot, but I kept a few. I have a couple sealed. We had a place called Fry's Electronics in Texas, and they shut down, and man, they just discounting them. It was like 10 for 10 or something like that. And I remember stocking up, and then college and moving and stuff. I don't know where they went, but I went all in, and I was just like you, talking crap, and the joke was on me, maybe, I guess.
All I got to say is whatever rental store had the 555 deal, take that. He's got a 10 for 10 deal over here.
Yeah, but I mean, it was at the end of the life cycle and everything, and they were just discounting everything. I guess that's the only kind of good deal that I got. That's not considered a rental store, but going back to that, there was a time the mom and pop shop, every once in a while they would throw like a Final Fantasy 2 out. Oh, it's not renting anymore, so we're gonna put that out and put it for sale. So I got like Final Fantasy 2 and 3 for like $25 back in the day, which is an amazing deal back then.
Yeah, I'm so jealous, you guys. I have never purchased a video game from a video game store. So I remember back in the day when they started to close, but I was not in this hobby yet, unfortunately. I mean, there was a lot of oh look, 14 copies of Madden for $1.99. There was those cases, obviously. And I do remember digging through because they always had a bin, right? It was like a big metal grate bin. It was just full, and you could just sit there and dig through stuff and dig through stuff. And I'm sure there was some good movies I think I probably picked up when they were like closing out some stuff, but I just can't imagine, Steve. I know you've picked up a fair amount of good games from that strategy, and like hearing that Dreamcast stuff, that is really cool.
Absolutely. Didn't all catch the rental store closeouts. It just so happened at the time. I wasn't really thinking about collecting, but I had started buying retro video games and nobody else really was. I mean, otherwise they wouldn't be on clearance for 20
Right.
bucks for a bin out of a commercial store. There was a time when stuff happened like that. And even like if you think about EB Games, which became GameStop, or if you had a GameStop, they even had those catalogs that would kind of give you an idea of the value of something, like $2 for stadium events, although there was never stadium events in the store. I think the rental store strategy was more get rid of it. It's $2 or $5 or whatever it was. And people would buy it if it was good games. They probably went pretty quick back then. It was still relevant.
Oh yeah, I remember. Well, I worked at Blockbuster. Real quick, Bill, did you have like a Game Zone Blockbuster? I think that's what it was called, where they basically took half of Blockbuster and turned it into like a game shop.
I think so. Now that you mention that, I kind of forgot that they had that they called it Game Zone. Yeah, no, that I definitely remember that. That rings a bell for sure.
Yeah, so that's where I worked because I was like, yeah, I worked at GameStop, and then I'm in college, and but then it closed down, and man, I mean, we always put out pre-owned stuff, and that was during the PS2 heyday, and I remember like Halo launches with them and everything, and then they just sold everything, and that's one of those things. Now thinking back, I'm like, man, I should have just like dropped a mint and and picked up everything, picked up their shelving, and just put it in a storage shed somewhere until now, but. It was a lot of fun.
I haven't heard the word game zone in a long time. So thank you for that.
Yeah, he resurrected a good one there. Yeah.
And the movie gallery where I got the Sega Dreamcast, you just reminded me of this too, talking about that. They had a competing product. It was not called Game Zone, but it was just like that. And that's why that half of the store was games.
Man, I wish I remember what the name of that. I remember walking in to one. I'm like, this is a straight up copycat of Blockbuster. It wasn't as good. Now I'm gonna have to look that up.
So I'm going to segue into something else. Steve, you kind of alluded a little bit to, like you mentioned the stadium events, but you said, that wasn't available. Just off the top of my head, I can think of some games that were only like Blockbuster exclusive. I think we have to mention the elephant in the room being retro collectors.
Oh, don't do it. Don't do it.
I'm not really a N64 collector, so there's your little tease, right? I, of course, am referring to Sculptor's Cut, which, what is that worth these days? It's got to be at least $1,000.
15.
1,500. Wow.
According to pricecharting.com, and for all the collectors in the audience here, don't stone me for using that as a reference. It says $1,080 currently. So
Okay.
it's probably somewhere between 1,000 and 1,500 depending on the condition. That varies quite a bit on pricing. But that's a lot of money for an exclusive rental game.
For an N64 game, let's be honest. No offense.
And if we're talking N64, don't forget Stunt Racer. That was the other one.
Right. So that was an exclusive, and then Infernal Machine, the Indiana Jones.
My CIB copy of that actually I think has a rental sticker on it.
Oh, there we go.
The only copy that I had, the super stuck on Blockbuster sticker.
Yeah, we need to discuss that and how ridiculous those stickers are. Has anyone tried taking one of those off? I don't think it's even worth it because you're just going to damage your game.
You're right, and I learned the hard way when I first started collecting. Is I'm like, I'm going to take this stupid sticker off.
The green circle sticker on there.
The green pre-played sticker. It looks like it might have said $9.99.
Dude, I feel like Uncle Rico. Man, if I could just go back, I could win state.
Yep, absolutely.
Just have like 5 boxes just and cherry pick. But yeah, I took one off and there's like a metal strip. I moved that off and it just ripped the whole front of the game. I think it was Quarterback Club or something, so I wasn't out but like 50 cents. But still, I tried and never again.
Yeah, anybody remember that? So they had security tags and all these stickers all over the place. They stick them on the games, they stick them on everything. Anybody walk out with the thing and it starts buzzing at you. It's like, wow, wow. You feel like a criminal, and they're like, just keep going. What happened if you really were stealing something? You'd probably get away with it.
I feel like those things are faulty more than they work. Like my wife will set them off even today, like at dollar stores or like other places. It's like, what? Why? What is those things have been around? Yeah, since we were kids at the rental stores. Yeah, that's interesting. Totally remember. I know exactly what you're talking about, Steve. You're like good to go, walking out the door, and then you just get that jarring noise. It's like, oh, bring it back. We're gonna need to take the scanner thing off. That's really funny.
Depending on
Yes.
what employee was working that day.
Yeah, I'm sure there were some that just waved you on. Yep, go ahead. So, is there any other exclusives that I can't think of anymore? But that was interesting being a completionist, right? Got to have that unicorn. That's only so many were made, and so that's got to be rough for a completion collector.
There's a couple other rental exclusives I think are worth mentioning at least. NFL Blitz Special Edition. That was a Blockbuster exclusive. That's also a game that's a little bit harder to find these days. Typically, that comes with a lot of these rental exclusives. Another interesting one from the Sega Genesis era, and this, since I'm a big Sega collector, this is the only reason I know this. Madden Special Championship Edition, which is actually the best Madden game on that system, in my opinion. It's a really good game, pretty hard to come by. It was a rental exclusive. I think it actually says something on the box, and there were some later editions that they ended up selling after the fact through retail. They put a sticker over top of it so that it covered up the whole rental thing or whatever it said on the cover. That was one, and that game became pretty pricey. I mean, the loose carts were at least $50 back when I was going after a copy. I got a good deal on it, luckily, from somewhere that somebody slipped or didn't know what it was. That happens a lot. If you look for Madden, they just assume it's worth $5. But no, there's actually Madden Championship Edition, which has a gold line on it. The other one that is probably a bit of a controversy in the retro gaming world, I don't know a lot about it. I haven't really ever invested any time into the argument. But Flintstones Surprise at Dinosaur Peak on NES. Half the people out there that say this was a rental exclusive, and half say no, it wasn't. And nobody's been able to definitively prove one way or another what that was. So there's probably somebody out there shaking their fist right now, saying it's a rental exclusive, damn it.
You could maybe look at the WADA population stuff and see if how many like sealed copies that are graded they have.
I bet there's not too many. And there's a number of SNES exclusive titles too. And there's a few other miscellaneous ones out there. Those are some of the bigger ones that I've heard at least people talk about.
So interesting thing that I was just thinking about. Did all these rental exclusive copies, did they have a box and a manual and all that stuff, or was it some cart only, or is there, how did that work?
Yeah, I mean, there's sealed copies out there. So they came in a traditional box. They came with a traditional manual, and I presume they would go right to the rental store, and that's where they would get rented. Not all rental stores put the box out. Some put a styrofoam thing inside there. I don't know if you guys remember that. So it would be like this little lightweight box sitting there, gave it a little bit of weight.
I do remember that.
Other places would cut the box and put it in the plastic wrapper, like the hard clamshell. You didn't think anything of it back then. Now you cringe. Other places, they would just put a box, like Blockbuster a lot of times just had this pre-printed Blockbuster logo, and on the back they'd have a description of the game on it. So it really depended on your rental store what you were going to get. And the same thing with manuals. You would end up with a manual where it would be photocopied. You'd end up with a manual that was like pristine sitting inside that box. You'd end up with a manual that was half full and apart, soaked in Coca-Cola, Dorito crumbs all over it. You never know. You never knew what you were going to get. But every rental store had different style. I mean, that was part of that.
Yeah, I remember going to the back of Blockbuster and they take them out and they would just flatten the boxes. So they're boxes full of N64 boxes. I caught the tail end of the cartridge stuff is when they were moving to GameCube and PS2. But yeah, looking at that, didn't even bat an eye. It was just back in the corner somewhere. And now they're lost, probably thrown away in a dumpster.
That's a great comment, Rob, because I ran into a guy at one of the collecting groups maybe 3 years ago, 4 years ago, back when I was still heavily in the hunt for the Sega Genesis set. And he had stacks of flat artwork from the boxes that he had bought out from a rental store. And the rental store basically took them all out of the plastic cases, I presume threw the plastic cases away, and they just stacked them up somewhere. So we had all sorts of titles. So games I was missing the box, I was like, yeah, I can get a plastic case easy. Some of these are hard to find the cover art for it. They were all legit, the original art that came in the boxes, and boom. I mean, that was really helpful. I probably got 50 to 60 boxes that way that I was missing just from there. I had to track down some clamshells, but if you collect enough, you find those clamshells from the sports games and wherever else. I'm pretty sure somebody, maybe it was you, Bill, that sold me some sports games for filling in some of those labels.
Yeah, and I was going to say the exact same thing you did, Steve. I've came across that individual because he still has them, a stack of them, of the original game art, and it's in great shape.
Yeah, it's like they're almost always in mint condition unless he's down to his last like one or two copies.
Yeah, they'd barely been touched. Literally, they're out of the box and put in another box and just sitting.
The other thing that I got from him that I don't know if he still has these, the slide trays that are always jacked up in the Sega Genesis titles. He had stacks and stacks of those flat. They look new, like they've never been folded. I'm presuming they probably took it out when it was brand new and just flattened it. That's probably why it looks so pristine. But they were beautiful. I replaced some of my ones. I took the exact same variant that went with the game. I made sure I wasn't just putting a random slide box in there because there is a number of different Sega Genesis variants for the slide box.
He's talking about the red cardboard inserts.
Yeah, the red cardboard inserts. They would get crushed all the time. The outside box would be okay. It'd fold over. But the cart would end there. Somebody would toss it in a box. It would end up loose. The cart would be bouncing around, ripping off the little holders inside those little cardboard red trays for the carts. And I've been able to replace a number of those through that.
I'm happy to report that my Castlevania Bloodlines copy is resting in one of those red trays that was a preserved one that I got recently.
Nice.
So yeah, that's a really cool relic from one of those stores from back in the day.
There's still relics out there. There's probably some cool relics in a warehouse somewhere that none of us know about.
So I actually had recently, you guys have maybe heard this too. Someone had found some new old stock of one of the launch titles for the Super Nintendo, F-Zero. Recently, I don't know, in the last couple of years or so, somebody had discovered just like a big pallet, probably a few hundred of them maybe, and all pristine, just in shrink wrap, brand new. So that was kind of interesting. I think it was like a late print run, so there maybe like greatest hits or whatever variant they called those for the Super Nintendo. It just makes you wonder what's still out there.
F-Zero is one of those ones that a lot of titles have showed up sealed, especially the greatest hits. It's not a super crazy expensive title. And I want to say one of the other ones, maybe Star Fox. I could be completely wrong there. There are some titles out there that had pallets of cases. And if there's enough of that, the demand for sealed games, it's a niche market. If there's enough of them, it's going to go down in price. It's still expensive, but it's not $10,000 expensive either.
Yeah, it's some interesting stuff for sure. I can't wait for the future to see if there's anything that comes out of storage unit finds or something else of new old stock stuff. It's always interesting to see. All right, guys. So I'm actually gonna bring us into a little bit of a lightning round here. A couple questions to close this out. Get your thinking caps on. A couple quick questions for each of you. Steve, I'm going to start with you. You're going through the checkout at Blockbuster. What is your go-to snack? And then also, if you could pick any of those exclusive rental titles today for your collection and you didn't have any of them, which one would you go with?
That's a really tough question. There's so many good things there. If I was going for a snack, I'm trying to think. Are we talking younger Steve or are we talking current day Steve?
Whichever way you want to go with it.
All right. Younger Steve is probably going for the junior mints, those little things that are like the movie style. I used to love those things. I don't know, something about the mint aftertaste. It was like really good. Or the Bunch of Crunch. That totally would have been up there for me too. I love the Bunch of
I
Crunch.
haven't heard that in a long time.
They're still around.
Whoa.
Are they around still?
Dang.
They're still around. The Bunch of Crunch are. And as far as the rental exclusives, what would I want? I could care less about Sculptor's Cut. I mean, seriously, the game's not worth what it costs. It's really just a collector item to me at this point. But probably the Flintstones Surprise at Dinosaur Peak, if that truly was a rental exclusive. That's one of those ones that I've always kind of been tempted to get, especially when I started NES collecting 10 plus years ago. It's one I thought about. I probably should have bought when I started collecting again, but hindsight's 2020.
Right? Love it. Okay, Rom, you're up. What are you going with?
So I like a nice mixture of Reese's Pieces and popcorn. You throw the Reese's Pieces in the popcorn and kind of gets warm and gets almost soft. It's great. And then game wise, see, there weren't many NES. Like I remember NES and Super Nintendo the most when it came to rentals. But I mean, probably just from a collection, it'd be cool to have. Is I'll be generic and say Clay Fighter. I've always enjoyed it on Super Nintendo. I never even played it on N64, so that would probably be my go-to.
Right on. I respect it. All right. So what I would go with is Twizzlers or any kind of licorice, kind of like the little nibs too, the little bites, just for something a little different. And then I think I'm gonna not pay attention to values, and I'm just gonna go with what game I would enjoy the most today, and that's gonna be Blitz Special Edition. It's just a great game to play multiplayer. I got some boys that can play with me. That's what I'm going with for my answer. Always fun to think about questions like that.
I think there's one topic we haven't really discussed in depth, and it's a controversial one too.
Oh, Steve wants to bring up controversy before we close this one
We're
out.
going big in the closing moments here. Rental store stickers. Do you leave them on your games or do
Ooh,
you take them off? Some people, that's a debated subject.
Don't take them off. You're gonna. I learned the hard way. I leave them on because I've destroyed a couple carts that I'm good. It adds character.
that's the hot seat question there. I've gone both ways, right? So when I first got into collecting, I'm like, get out the rubbing alcohol, get out whatever tools I need. I'm going to do surgery. I'm going to take these stickers off. They're terrible. They're ugly. You just get them off of there. Especially the ones, there's some that have just, for whatever reason, there's like multiple stickers. I never got that. I've kind of changed my tune a little bit. It's sentimental, especially I'm waiting to find, I had mentioned all these different ma and pa type places that I grew up. And I specifically remember from back in the day, a lot of those places even had the phone number on there. And it's a phone number I would recognize because it would have the prefix that I grew up with. So I'm waiting for a copy to show up. I'm going to get one eventually. There's got to be some in circulation. But those for sure I won't touch. Like it'll be so cool to say, "Hey, look at that. I remember going to that specific store." That's what I'm hoping for and that's what I'm going with. So I'm I'll leave them sentimental. Just leave it on there.
Yeah, I remember that the stickers, there was a different variety or amount of stickers you got depending on where you went. Some places they stuck stickers on stickers. One was like the sticker for the rental store name, one was a sticker for the security strip. It was horrendous sometimes. And if you ever been a collector trying to remove stickers, you're always panicking that you're not going to damage your label somehow, some way. Some labels are more forgiving than others. There are different techniques out there, and what I will say is there are effective ways if you're patient to remove stickers in almost all circumstances. And one of them is to use your hair dryer, turn it on high heat, work with your fingernail just slightly, don't rush it. If it starts getting resistance, heat it again with the thing. And then take a microfiber cloth in there and remove the residue slowly but surely. Heat it up with the thing. It'll be gone. It'll take you 20 minutes, but it'll be gone. If it's a valuable title or one you really want to expose, you can do that. There are some types of labels you can get away with using chemicals on. There's some you cannot. You will destroy the label if you do that. So whether you value that or not, all I'm going to say is just be careful and make sure you test it out with a cheap game before you go into an expensive game. Make sure you know what you're doing. I personally do not like rental store stickers. I get the sentimental value that some do. I think a little differently about that. If it's a rental exclusive game, it's like, okay, that kind of authenticates that this was genuine copy, especially some of the more expensive ones. I feel like if you had it, but then some of the expensive collectors may not want that. Generally, I would say that the collecting community as a whole seems to value not having the sticker on it as opposed to having a sticker on it. Just from eBay resale values, you'll see that trend. They'll sell more when they're clean and not with stickers. But I'm kind of impartial. And I found it kind of interesting too. One of the things we didn't mention today, it ties into the label a little bit, is the Blockbuster used to have the Pokemon Snap kiosks and I think it also worked with Pokemon Stadium, but there was a little slot on that cartridge, I think, for like writing your name or something on it. There was this white line, and I don't even remember what that's for. But I presume that was so that you would not lose your copy as opposed to your mom sticking a sticker on it. or writing your name on the copy of there. But that was cool back in the day. You could take your copy in and you could go ahead and print out a sticker sheet of all your cool Pokemon you caught or whatever. I remember trying to get all these cool poses and just print them out, thinking I was cool stuff. A lot of collectors go for those machines. They sell for multiple thousands of dollars on the resale market or more, depending on the condition of the things. So people love those things. They remember them.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I forgot about that. Thanks for bringing that up. Yeah, that's something really unique that you wouldn't see nowadays. Everything nowadays would be app based or, something, download this or whatever. But that's really cool how they integrated it with the cartridge even.
You remember when they not only the stickers, remember when they would put the Be Kind Rewind sticker and it would end up on on the game? It's like, okay, let me rewind my games for you. They would penalize you for not rewinding your videos. Kids don't know that.
Man, we had we had a lineup of like 10 or 12 of those auto rewinders, man. And guarantee you had to check and like, here we go. Pop, 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 put them all in, makes a lot of noise. Thanks for bringing back a core memory of mine. Doing that every morning if I have it open, I'm like, then when DVDs were great because we didn't have to do that anymore, but we still had 4 or 5 of them because we still carried VHSs. Appreciate that.
It's starting to all click with me now why I receive the wrong movie sometimes or wrong game. You're probably busy rewinding them things and you're distracted and you put the wrong one in the wrong case. You're frustrated from having to do all that.
Well, if we want to talk video store stuff, did you guys ever have to sit like a popular movie just came out and you're just sitting waiting for someone to turn it in so that you can get it? Did y'all ever have to do that? Games, it was rare because you're like, you only have 2 or 3 of the copies, the odds of it. But if like a new, like The Matrix came out and you're wanting to watch it, I remember standing just waiting for 2 hours, just waiting for someone to like return that movie so I could rent it.
I remember going to the front of the store and asking them, because you always had to ask them if it wasn't back on the shelf. It's like, oh, I'm looking for this. You would carry the dummy that was on the shelf. You'd be like, hey, do you got this back in? Did somebody return it? And then they look through the pile and be like, yeah, and it would make your day, or no, and it'd be like, damn it.
See, I was a little bit more obsessive. I would just stand there and wait, and I'm watching someone on the outside come in and drop that tape off. I'm like, is it there? I mean, I know I probably pissed off the freaking workers over there, but it's part of it.
I'm kind of envisioning a moment of Rom sitting in the back of the horror section with all those creepy noises, and as somebody walks in, it's like, and there comes Ron just waiting, trying to get his copy of whatever it was, and then the disappointment, he goes back in the corner for the next one.
It's pretty much how it was, man. Yeah, that was like, because I could just walk over there, so it's like, let me go see if this is in. During the summer, it's like 10 o'clock in the morning. All right, I'm going to walk over there and wait for this to come in. Mildly obsessive, probably. If I had something in my mind, I was like, I'm not going to quit until I get this. As an adult with collecting, that's a bad thing because you're like, I'll pay whatever. Just, I want this. I have this in my mind. But I want to add real quick. So y'all were talking at the beginning of like the stuff y'all remember renting all the time. For me, I think that's Mega Man 4. That was the first Mega Man I ever played. And I rented that game every weekend for probably about 2 months. And so that's probably the one that you were talking about Banjo-Kazooie. That's probably mine. Mega Man or Chrono Trigger. Those are the two that I rented the most. And that's just like Mega Man. The newer Nintendo games, I don't know if y'all remember, but the newer Nintendo games, like I felt that they weren't released as much. So you couldn't go to Toys R Us and they have like 5 or 10 copies. The releases were kind of spread out. And so I was like, oh, they have Mega Man 4. I can't get it anywhere else. That like Ninja Turtles Tournament Fighters. Did you ever play that?
Oh, yeah.
Piling, that steaming bag of crap on NES. For some reason, I loved that game, and I would always try to rent it. So
I started off renting TMNT2, the arcade for NES. And so when I tried that game, I went back to TMNT, and I'm like, what is this? This isn't Ninja Turtles. I just remember thinking, like, this isn't a Ninja Turtles game. Well, you're not beating anybody up. And those games were classics, man. I went right back to that, playing in the arcades, too, if you remember those machines.
Oh.
It was always a toss-up for me between TMNT, the arcade game, or Simpsons arcade game. Those both, to me, were on the same scale of awesomeness. And renting, I totally remember TMNT renting that game. Never had a Super Nintendo, so I didn't do the Turtles in Time, but I did rent Hyperstone Heist, and I love the heck out of that for Genesis.
We can do a whole episode on Konami beat 'em ups, so that'll be a future episode. A lot of good ones.
Yeah, because you're forgetting X-Men.
Oh,
X-Men was Konami, right? Dude, that big old arcade.
You just unlocked a core memory from mine.
Yeah, there's an arcade over here that has two of them.
Nice.
Yeah, it's great. My kids are like, "What was so fun about this?" I'm like, "You don't understand how much money I put in this stupid arcade machine."
Do you guys remember any arcade machines at rental stores? Was that a thing? I feel like they would have something like that, or at least like the crane gotcha type machines. I know, Steve, you mentioned the quarter machines.
If they had a crane machine, it would be next to the quarter and the gumball machine. They were always grouped together. I don't remember arcade machines at the rental store. I remember arcade machines at the movie theater.
Oh, yeah.
We didn't have a lot of arcades around, so that was one of the places you went if you wanted to play arcade games. I remember going with my grandparents. I remember my parents always trying to get like quarters and pump them in those things. I like that they're bringing back arcade machines now with some of those in-house ones. What's the company that does those?
Arcade One Up.
One Up cabinets. Yeah, they're reasonably priced. They supposedly have had some quality issues from what I've heard. You know, I can't speak to myself, but the fact that they're licensing these old arcade games and cool ones at that, I would love to own one or two of those once I finally get everything set up in my game room here.
That's really cool. All right. Well, I want to thank you guys for joining us. Stay tuned to the next episode. We're going to have a episode on modding coming at you next episode. So thanks for tuning in to the Retro Recall podcast. And until next time,